Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is novelist Anton DiScalfani. DiScalfani's first novel, the Yonahlossee Writing Camp for Girls, was set in Florida and in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, and was a New York Times bestseller. Her new novel, The After Party, is a study of the rich and privileged, mostly young women, of the River Oaks section of Houston in the middle 1950s. Please join me here at the Alabama Booksmith as I speak with Miss Anton DiScalfani. Anton, it is good to meet you.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you as well.
We've never met before, even though I understand now you are at Auburn and have been for, one school year?
One school year. We moved in July of last year, so it hasn't been a year yet. But I've just finished my second semester.
And I have to assume you're teaching fiction writing, creative writing.
Yes. I have taught historical fiction, which I also write, and then the short, which I do not write, but I'm interested in that form. So it's fiction of 1,500 words or less.
Are the classes really short?
The student work is short.
Well, that's a blessing.
Yes.
When you take it home, anyway. Our viewers will not know you because you're new to Alabama and because you're new to the program. But the little that I do know about you, you were partly raised in Florida, and perhaps in North Carolina. What is your biography, so to speak?
So I'm a Southerner. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and then I was raised partly in Memphis and then partly in Ocala, Florida, which is more like a small town in Georgia than Florida. And Florida is, of course, it's the southern part of the state is very different than the northern part of the state. I went to college in Atlanta. To Emory, and then I went to graduate school at Washington University in St. Louis, and I was supposed to stay 2 years, and I ended up staying 10. And I met my husband there, and we taught for a while, and we just moved to Alabama last year.
Would people recognize your creative writing teachers? Because there have been some famous ones in St. Louis, for example.
I hope so. I studied with Jim Grimsley, who is a wonderful Southern writer at Emory. And then in St. Louis, I studied with Catherine Davis, the great Catherine Davis, and she writes experimental fiction. She's a great prose stylist. And then also, I didn't study with them, but I interacted with them, Mary Jo Bang and Carl Phillips, the poets.
And then went on to do it yourself. You must have had the MFA in St. Louis,
yes.
Right? Your first novel made the New York Times bestseller list.
Yes.
Which is
by the skin of its teeth.
Which
yes.
is it's not exactly like being pregnant, but you're either on the New York Times list or you're not. It is. I hope not. Autobiographical. It's not autobiographical.
No. Well, it takes place in the 20s. So.
Right.
but no, I didn't take my modern life
the settings are places that you know about.
Yes.
Did you, when you were growing up in Florida, did you have citrus, as the expression goes?
We did not. My father was a physician, still is a physician, but we were surrounded by citrus farms. There was a big freeze, I think it was in the 80s, and it really pushed back the citrus farther south. So there used to be more citrus farms in the Orlando, Ocala area, and then the freeze killed them. So the thing that is autobiographical about my writing is place.
Right.
And the house in Ocala was based on the house that I grew up in. It's an old home built in the 20s. And then my family had still has a cabin in Valley Cruces, North Carolina, which is a stone's throw from where the real Yonahlossee Writing Camp for Girls was. So when it closed in 1985, it was the longest running girls camp in North Carolina. Oh. And by the time I knew of it, it was already closed. But I grew up eating dinner at the gamekeeper, which is located in the old headmaster's cabin, and I know, nothing happened. And there's a Yonahlossee subdivision. I mean, the name is everywhere, and there were old photographs of Yonahlossee girls in the gamekeeper's restaurant. And I always found them evocative.
Your heroine, your protagonist in Yonahlossee, is living happily with her family in Florida, and she misbehaves and is sent, she thinks, for the summer to the writing camp, where by this time we're getting to 1930.
Yes.
And the Depression is on, but they haven't lost their money yet, but some people are losing their money. At the camp, several things about the camp. There was a writing camp for girls.
Yes. But it was only a summer camp.
But it didn't go year round like
No.
this one sort of does.
Yes.
And horses. There's a lot about horses in this book. Of course there is, because that's what they do.
Yes.
And are you a horsewoman?
I am. I'm kind of a dormant horsewoman right now, but I grew up riding, and then so the character in my book, the jumps, and most kids start, if you're writing English, you start jumping very early, and I quickly found out that I wasn't brave enough to jump. I mean, you have to kind of have some fearlessness when you're approaching a big jump on a big horse, and I just didn't have it, and the horse can sense it, and it all falls apart very quickly. So the kind of writing I did is called dressage, which is all flat work. My father says it's like watching paint dry. I mean, he went to a lot of dressage shows over the years, so it would not be a dramatic thing to write about. So I had the jump.
Dressage comes out of the Spanish riding school in
Yes.
Austria, and is very nuanced.
Yes, it is.
And it lacks the...
Yeah. I mean, anybody can appreciate jumping, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you see a horse go up to a jump, and the horse makes it or doesn't make it. And dressage, it's like, what was the thrust like on that hind leg and the half pass? I mean, it's not. It's like watching golf, I think.
I'm almost embarrassed to do this segue, but since it popped into my head, that the dressage, the fine gradations of excellence, judges, of course, can see this.
Yes.
In your novels, the first one especially, though, all these girls, if I went to the Yonahlossee writing camp for girls, I would say, oh, look, there are some pretty ones and some not some pretty ones, and there's some really rich ones and maybe some only slightly rich ones. But what you do in that novel, and again in the second novel, is you're the sociologist, anthropologist of upper middle, lower upper, these very, very fine gradations among what are privileged young women. Mm-hmm. That's important to you.
Yes, this is kind of a dubious title. I think the anthropologist of the social hierarchies. Yes, I mean, it's something that I feel like I've been paying attention to all my life. I mean, as a writer, as somebody who is an observer, I don't know if, I think about that. I don't know if it's just me or if, every girl in my high school class was similarly attuned to the subtle differences between people. And they, in 1930, they really, really mattered. And it was,
sure.
And they matter now too, but they mattered in a different way then. And the girls themselves had no agency. So it was all about who their fathers were and who their mothers were and what kind of families they came from. And then in the Depression, it mattered even more because if you had just enough money, you'd probably lose everything. If you had massive amounts of money, then you'd lose a lot of it, but you'd be fine. Right. So those small differences became very large.
Right. I was enamored back in the 60s and 70s of ethology, which was Lionel Tiger and Robert Fox and Montague, the naked ape, and the premise of those books was that in any group, the group almost always and instantly knows.
Yes.
If there are 24 cows in a pasture, they have actually arranged themselves alpha to omega, 1 to 24.
Horses too.
Is that right? Horses too?
Yes. I mean, when a bunch, I mean, generally, if horses are expensive enough, they're turned out individually. But if they're turned out in a group, I mean, there's the alpha horse, there's the next in command, the next in command, the next in. I mean, I think it's in high school. I mean, my last name is DiScalfani. We were in a very southern place. Not
a lot of DiScalfanis around.
I wasn't a cheerleader. I didn't really care about football. I mean, I was a definite outsider in high school, as I think many people are. But it was I was keenly interested in the social hierarchy without being successful in the social hierarchy. So I feel like it gave me it was a good vantage point from which to view everything.
Your heroine in writing camp, whose name now has left my mind.
Thea.
When she arrives up there at Blowing Rock, I mean, she isn't there 15 minutes before she's figured out who all these other girls are and where they matter. A lot of this, of course, is appropriate for your second novel as well, but we'll get there. But both novels, the first one very, very overtly, and the second one, I think, a little less overtly, are structured around a secret.
Yes.
A mystery, which you withhold at agonizing length.
Yes.
And you're going, I mean, it's your book. You made this book. You decided what the secret was going to be, which we're not, it's only fair we won't say.
No spoiler.
No spoiler here. No, we'll just let it go. There is a secret. She gets sent there because there is an action that people disapprove of. But then that becomes a part of the second novel, the after party as well. So structurally, you like that.
Yes.
Can you say why?
Yes. I mean, it's actually something that I used to get in trouble for in workshop in my master's program, because all of my short stories had secrets, and and it was like a tick, like this thing was coming, but we couldn't find out what it was yet. So it's I mean, I think that there are certain instincts you have as a writer, and one of my instincts is that I like a secret. I think that it makes a book a page turner.
Let's see, what did this girl do?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
sure.
Well, and I think you write the books that you like to read, and I like a book that promises me something. I mean, I like a story.
Yes.
I like an old-fashioned story.
Right.
And in terms of narrative tension, to have something that you're kind of dangling in front of the reader, I mean, you have to be careful. I mean, that's the thing, that I have to be careful with it, because I'm so in love with the idea of a secret that I want to make sure that I don't do too much dangling, and that the idea of the secret doesn't overwhelm the actual book. And then I also just think it's in terms of, so there's the plot, there are the obvious kind of benefits in terms of plot, but then in terms of character, what does it mean in the first book, what does it mean for the narrator to have this thing that she can't talk about, this thing that nobody can know, this source of shame, and so it complicates character.
There is a perpetual leitmotif emanating from Hollywood of how there are not enough roles for actresses. Well, you fixed that. Yeah. If they make your two novels into movies, it will employ collectively 24 actresses of different ages. But I am not a woman, and I thought the men in this first book, shabby. Yeah. I mean, and the men in the second book are, you know who they reminded me of, seriously? The men in the second book reminded me of the men in The Help.
Oh, interesting.
Who are off doing something somewhere, but none of the women know exactly what it is, and they don't care.
It's a woman's world. Yes.
And the men are either mildly corrupt or irrelevant.
Yes.
In the first book, they're mildly corrupt, except Dad.
Yes, who's a little bit irrelevant, I think. I mean,
but he's your physician father.
Although very unlike my actual father, who
Of course.
it would have been way too nosy to let those things happen under his roof. Yeah, I mean, in the first book, I know that people read it differently, but I really meant, especially with Mr. Holmes, to write a complicated male character. I mean, I didn't want him to be a villain.
I thought he was tormented. I thought he was conflicted.
Yes, and which isn't to say that he doesn't do morally reprehensible things, but people do morally reprehensible things all the time. So, in the second book, I was I was really interested to write about a woman's world.
Yes.
and all the kind of intricacies of a woman's world. And I did with Ray. I wanted to write just a nice guy.
Ray's a nice guy.
Yes.
Right. He
An
is
uncomplicated nice guy.
He is much put upon.
Yes, much put upon.
And patient and nice. I thought the women in the after party are older. They're between they're 25 or so at the close of action. They're 16 or 17 sort of at the opening of action. And the thing that I thought, I am learning more. Again, it's rank order, alpha to omega. Everybody knows that Joan is number one.
Yeah.
Yes. Cece maybe number two, but mainly because she knows Joan, so on. But it was clothing. And I thought, wait. And I looked, and as I say, I read this with some care. And I thought, wait, these are the people who have the most expensive clothes. These are the people who have the best taste in clothes. And these are the women who wear their clothes the best. And even if they don't have the best taste or the most expensive clothes, they know how to put it together.
Yes, they know how to put it together.
Women readers love this. I am presuming this.
I hope so. I hope so.
I thought this is amazing. The way this hierarchy works is adornment, so to speak.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I think that kind of female hierarchy still works in that way, and it's different, and there are the range is much wider, but definitely clothes are a weapon in that book. Yeah. I mean, clothes are a way for women to kind of get ahead, and I appreciate you reading it with such detail.
All right, here's something which I'm reading long, and this is a book about rich people who have achieved the American dream, so to speak, and they are not as happy as you think they might be. And one of them has the last name of Buchanan, and there's a Tom Buchanan, and there is a heroine who dives from a high place, daring, more bold and risk-taking than all the other girls. And I'm thinking, and you know this.
Yes.
So what?
That's accidental.
How did The Great Gatsby infiltrate your novel?
Honestly, that is something that I realized after I wrote the novel. I love The Great Gatsby, but I wasn't thinking. I hadn't read it in several years, although I have parts of it. If not committed to memory, close. But
yes.
I think the idea is this kind of hopefulness that turns out to be sad by the end. I think that's something that is definitely from The Great Gatsby and informs my my writerly outlook without me exactly knowing.
Yeah, well, I have no complaint about this. In fact, I thought the newly rich of Houston in the 50s do match up in many ways with the newly rich of Long Island.
That's true.
In the 20s. And I think it is the pursuit of it's the bursting of the bubble of the American dream. If only we have a whole lot of money and a really nice house, we'll be happy.
And then we aren't.
That
was one of the things that interested me about Houston in the 1950s. There was more money than sense. And people had access to incredible wealth, but they were newly rich, and they were people that would have been laughed out of the society registers or the social registers in other parts of the country.
They're not moving to Newport.
No, they are definitely not. So there was this sense of hopefulness, and because there weren't any rules, and they didn't have to do what they weren't bound by these constraints that somebody, the people of Newport would have been bound by. But then they needed rules, and they wanted them. They just didn't exactly know where to look for this. So that fascinated me about Houston. The rest of the country did and still does think of Houston as tacky, for lack of a better word, and
raw or new.
Yeah, new, and new money isn't ever, I think, a complimentary term, and that's what.
And especially mountains of it from the oil patch.
Yes.
Newport, in Boston, you had Lowell's and Cabots and Lodges, and then when you got to Newport, you had Vanderbilt and Astor's, and same in New York, and then you got to Houston, and you had nobody with billions of dollars.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And I think that the rest of the country just kind of looked on, a little bit aghast at the goings on in Houston, but there was such a sense of anything was possible at that time. The people who lived there, like they had all this money, they didn't have rules, and they felt like they could do anything, and they couldn't, of course. But that was something that, as a fiction writer, was a amazing thing to write about.
Well, the nightclub life looks exhausting.
I think it was.
From my present perspective, it's really exhausting.
Yeah.
But I can't even imagine myself at 25
I know.
staying up till dawn, night after night. It must have.
I know it was. Well, there were details. A lot of the book takes place at the Shamrock, which was oilman Glenn McCarthy's hotel that he built, and he built it in homage to his Irish heritage, and it had 63 shades of green. And you really there were details that I literally could not have made up. There were so many, the things that
The Cork Club.
Yes, the Cork Club. My grandfather was actually a waiter in the Cork Club, and an Italian waiter in the 40s. But yeah, the details were incredible.
In the course of the novel, I think this is true, but I will absolutely say that it's said twice, and perhaps it's said 3 times. Cece, who's the, in a sense, the beta female in this collection, says, "Well, I'm sure glad I don't have a husband who's light in his loafers."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I knew what that was, and then it got repeated.
Yes.
Is this something that people in Houston talk about? Closeted husbands? That's what we're after here, right? I said, what?
I don't think that it was something that was spoken about in polite company, but I think there were rumors, and there were certainly, certainly there were men and women who were gay who were trapped in heterosexual marriages, and I think that at that time it would just be terribly sad for both parties. For the closeted man and then the woman who had married him, and I think that what I was trying to get at there was that it was totally. When you were a woman in that day and age, it was totally a matter of luck who you ended up with, and woe be to you if you ended up with a man who did not want to be with you.
So this was not Fiddler on the Roof, but there was still or India, but there's still arrangements, appropriate husbands.
Yes,
you're not exactly falling in love and choosing.
Well, and I think that was the trick of Houston, that it convinced people that you could do anything and be anyone, but you couldn't. Nobody ever can, and so there were cases of people who got divorced in the 50s, but they were outcasts in one way or another. In
this novel, as in the first one, there is a secret.
Yes.
And again, it is tantalizingly revealed like the like the layers on an onion, but it is revealed. People will not go too far into the novel before you realize what these girls have as a secret. and then it just didn't seem to be bad enough, that secret.
It's hard to talk about this without.
I know.
I think.
But they sure didn't want anybody to know. Let's say that, right?
I think in that day and age, for a woman of Joan's stature, that secret was devastating. I mean, it would have ruined her life. It did ruin her life, but it would have ruined it in a different way. I mean, it was important to me to set the book before women had access to birth control. I mean, access to the pill. Also before Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique was published, and it was enormously. It was very widely read. But that's the thing about historical fiction, right? Like, we look at that and we think, well, there were other ways of dealing with that. There were surely she could have done something else. But I think at the time, things like that ruined women's lives.
Oddly enough, that's not the secret I'm thinking about.
Oh,
I'm thinking about
Thea?
Mama, Thea, and her mother.
You're thinking of the first book. No,
not Thea.
Book.
No,
Okay.
no, Cece and her mother is sick and dying.
Oh, yes,
That's a pretty important secret too.
Yes. There's so many secrets.
Joan is the nonconformist, and she's the one who's going to suffer.
Yes.
Alpha Joan. We have 1 minute,
Oh,
and
that flew by.
You have a novel that's on the bestseller list. It was on the bestseller list. You have a novel that comes out today or something. I mean, it really is right now, isn't it? And what are you working on down the road? I know you're on the road with this book now.
I know. I put it aside while I'm on the road because I'm afraid anything that I wrote in a hotel room would not be good. But I'm working on a Southern Gothic ghost story. So it takes place in Alabama because I'm living in Alabama, and
right.
I'm taken by the rural beauty of the area surrounding Auburn, and it is set in the 40s. It's about a woman who has to marry a man because she's pregnant, and then she's taken to his home, and weird things start happening.
Okay. I will look for this rural sort of, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
hopefully it'll be creepy.
Okay, good. Well, this interview is not creepy. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I have enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.